The driver blew a tire by the motel, opened the trunk, and said, "Stay right here with me." It wasn't a question. It was a command, low and steady, muffled by the hiss of dying rubber and the grit of the highway shoulder. Cal's voice had a texture to it, like worn leather, and it wrapped around the words, grounding them. Grounding me. I stood frozen on the cracked pavement, the sickly orange light of the vacancy sign flickering across his broad back as he wrestled with the trunk latch. The air smelled of hot asphalt, diesel fumes, and the coming rain, a heavy, electric scent that clung to the humidity. My own scent was probably fear, a sharp, coppery tang of anxiety that had been my constant companion for the last 500 miles. He finally got the trunk open with a grunt of satisfaction, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. The car, a generic company sedan that had been our shared world for the past 8 hours, now seemed wounded, listing to one side like a beached animal. Cal moved with an unhurried efficiency that I had come to both admire and resent. In the 3 months I'd known him, since I'd been assigned to his survey team, I had never once seen him flustered. Not when the geological scanner fried itself in a downpour. Not when a disgruntled landowner threatened us with a shotgun. Not now, stranded on the edge of nowhere with a shredded tire and a sky that was starting to look bruised. "Stay right here with me." The words replayed in my head, a looped recording I couldn't shut off. He probably just meant, "Don't wander into traffic." A practical instruction. But the inclusion of "with me" felt different. It felt personal. It created a space, a small, two-person bubble on the side of a forgotten highway, and I was inside it with him. My heart gave a stupid, hopeful little kick against my ribs. I was an expert at misinterpreting kindness for affection, a master of building entire romantic epics out of stray glances and accidental touches. This was just another chapter in a long, sad book of my own making. I watched him work. His hands, which I'd only ever seen meticulously cleaning sensitive equipment or sketching precise topographical maps, were now covered in grease and road grime. He moved with a familiar strength, his shoulders straining against the thin fabric of his work shirt as he loosened the lug nuts. The rhythmic clang of the tire iron was the only sound for a long moment, a steady, metallic heartbeat in the twilight. I could see the muscles in his forearms tense and release, the cords standing out in sharp relief. He was a man of quiet competence, a man who fixed things. I was a man who noticed the way the fading light caught the line of his jaw. My own hands felt useless, tucked into the pockets of my jeans. I should have offered to help. I knew, vaguely, the mechanics of changing a tire. But I felt like a boy standing next to a man, an observer in my own life. It was a role I was comfortable with, one I had perfected over years of watching things happen from a safe distance. Getting involved meant risking failure, risking looking foolish. Cal never seemed to have that fear. He just did what needed to be done. "Spares a donut," he said, not looking at me. His voice was slightly breathless from the effort. "Won't get us far." And not at speed. He straightened up, wiping a smear of black grease from his forehead with the back of his wrist, leaving a dark smudge in its place. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes, a deep, unreadable brown, met mine. "Looks like we're staying at the Chateau d'Asphalt for the night." His lips quirked in a half-smile, a rare occurrence that always seemed to catch me off guard. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a hint of something playful underneath the stoic exterior. I felt my own mouth twitch in response, a pathetic echo of his humor. The motel sign flickered again, one of the letters in vacancy completely dark, making it read "Vac and CY." It seemed appropriate. "Lucky us," I managed, my voice sounding thin and reedy. Cal grunted, turning back to the task. He hauled the sad little donut tire from its well and rolled it into place. I watched the methodical process, the tightening of the nuts, the lowering of the jack. He worked without wasted motion. Every movement had a purpose. It was mesmerizing in a way. He was so completely present in his body, in the physical world. I spent most of my time lost in the labyrinth of my own thoughts, a place of shadows and hypotheticals. The rain started then, not a downpour, but a fine, misty drizzle that instantly beaded on the car's waxy surface and clung to the fine hairs on my arms. It dampened the sound of the world, creating an even more intense sense of isolation. It was just us, the wounded car, the humming, flickering sign. "Grab the bags, Leo," he said, giving the last lug nut a final, forceful twist. Let's see if this place has hot water. Or any water, for that matter. I obeyed, pulling our 2 duffels from the back seat. My own was a soft, shapeless thing. His was a sturdy, military-style canvas bag that looked like it had seen more of the world than I ever would. I slung mine over my shoulder and grabbed the handle of his. The weight of it was substantial, solid. Like him, we walked across the parking lot, the gravel crunching under our boots. The motel was a single-story, L-shaped building with peeling paint and dark windows that looked like vacant eyes. A single light burned over a door marked Office. Cal reached it first and pulled the door open, a small bell tinkling somewhere in the dim interior. He held the door for me, and as I passed, his arm brushed against my back. It was nothing. A simple, common courtesy. But the warmth of the contact shot through my thin jacket, a jolt of electricity that made the breath catch in my throat. I am a catalog of small touches. I remember them all. The way a friend's hand lingered on my shoulder a moment too long in college. The brush of a stranger's knuckles against mine as we both reached for the same book in a shop. These moments were landmarks in the otherwise featureless landscape of my emotional life. This one, Cal's hand on my back, was a towering redwood. I would think about it for days. I would analyze its weight, its duration, its intent, until it was worn smooth and meaningless from overuse. The office smelled of stale cigarette smoke and pine sol. An old woman with hair the color of nicotine stains sat behind a high counter, watching a small, staticky television. She barely glanced at us as Cal placed his credit card on the counter. 1 room, 2 beds, he said. His voice filled the small, dusty space. The woman slid a key attached to a large plastic fob across the counter. Number 7. End of the line. Checkouts at 11-inch. We walked back out into the drizzle. The air was cooler now, and I shivered, though I wasn't sure it was from the cold. The key was for room 7. Cal's lucky number, he told me once. He had a small, faded tattoo of a 7 on his inner wrist, partially hidden by his watch. He'd never explained it. I'd never asked. I just added it to the growing collection of mysteries that made up the man walking beside me. The room was exactly what you'd expect. 2 double beds with thin, patterned comforters, a scarred wooden desk, and a television bolted to the wall. The carpet was a swirl of brown and orange that probably hid a universe of sins. But it was clean, or at least it smelled clean, the same pine sol scent from the office, only stronger here. Cal dropped his bag by the bed closest to the door and immediately went to the window, peering through the blinds. Can't see the car from here, he murmured, more to himself than to me. Hope no one gets any ideas about our gear in the trunk. I dropped my own bag by the other bed, the one by the window. It felt like a deliberate choice, claiming my territory. The small space of the room seemed to shrink with both of us in it. I was acutely aware of him, of the space he occupied, of the way the air seemed to shift when he moved. He turned from the window and started unlacing his boots. First thing tomorrow, I'll call a garage in the next town over, he said, his voice practical, already problem-solving. Should have us back on the road by noon. Okay, I said. The word was a small, useless pebble dropped into the vast silence of the room. He pulled off his boots and set them neatly by the door. Then he started unbuttoning his shirt. I quickly looked away, my eyes darting around the room, landing on a water-stained patch on the ceiling. My heart was hammering. It was ridiculous. We were 2 guys, colleagues, sharing a room to save the company a few dollars. This was normal, but nothing about how I felt was normal. My reaction was a chemical spill, toxic and uncontrollable. I am here, in a motel room with Cal. He is taking off his shirt. The thought was so loud, so immediate, it felt like I'd shouted it. I risked a glance. He'd shed the work shirt, revealing a plain gray t-shirt underneath. It clung to his shoulders and chest, a testament to the physique he maintained with a quiet, disciplined rigor. I knew he ran every morning, no matter where we were, no matter the weather. I, on the other hand, considered the walk from the car to the office a significant cardiovascular event. He tossed the dirty shirt onto his bag and then stretched, his arms reaching for the ceiling. The hem of his t-shirt rode up, exposing a strip of tan skin and the waistband of his jeans. It was a completely unconscious, unself-conscious movement, and it was devastatingly intimate. I felt like a voyeur, a thief stealing a glimpse of something I had no right to see. I turned away again, my face hot. I'm gonna try that water, he said, his voice closer now. I heard the bathroom door creak open, then the sound of the shower sputtering to life. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the mattress sighing under my weight. I could hear him moving around in the small bathroom, the sounds of running water, the clink of a soap dish. I stared at the closed door, my mind a blank slate of roaring static. For years, I had constructed fantasies about him, quiet daydreams on long drives or during mind-numbing data entry. They were safe, contained within the walls of my own skull. But now, reality was pressing in, thin and porous. The barrier between my inner world and the real one was dissolving. He was just a few feet away, showering, and the sheer domesticity of it was more potent than any of my elaborate fantasies. I should do something. Unpack. Check my phone. Anything to distract myself. I pulled my phone from my pocket. No service. Of course. We were in a dead zone, a pocket of the world forgotten by cell towers and civilization. It was just us. The thought sent another shiver through me, this one not from cold or fear, but from something else, something terrifyingly like hope. The shower shut off. I quickly shoved my phone back in my pocket and pretended to be intensely interested in the hideous pattern on the comforter. A few minutes later, the door opened, and a cloud of steam billowed out, carrying the scent of cheap motel soap and something else, something that was just him. Cal. He had a towel wrapped around his waist, another one draped over his shoulders. His hair was dark and damp, slicked back from his forehead. Droplets of water clung to his chest and arms, tracing the lines of his muscles. My breath hitched. My brain, my traitorous, overactive brain, cataloged every detail. The dusting of dark hair on his chest, the way the towel hung low on his hips, the clean, sharp scent of his skin. He wasn't sculpted like a model in a magazine. He was solid, real. There were a few faded scars on his torso, thin white lines against his tanned skin. Stories I would never know. He met my gaze, and for a split second, his easygoing demeanor faltered. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, uncertainty, before it was gone, replaced by his usual stoic calm. But I saw it. I knew I did. Or maybe I just wanted to. All yours, he said, gesturing to the bathroom with his head. His voice was a little rougher than usual. I nodded, unable to form words. I grabbed my bag and practically fled into the bathroom, shutting the door behind me with a decisive click. I leaned against it, my eyes closed, listening to the frantic thumping of my own heart. I could still see him in my mind's eye, a perfect, high-definition image burned onto the back of my eyelids. Stay right here with me. The words had a new meaning now, a new weight. In the steam-filled bathroom of a rundown motel, with the sound of his movements filtering through the thin door, it felt less like an instruction and more like a plea, or a promise. I took the fastest, coldest shower of my life, trying to shock my system back to normal. It didn't work. When I emerged, wrapped in a towel that felt like sandpaper, Cal was already in his bed, lying on his back with his hands laced behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He was wearing a fresh t-shirt and a pair of worn gray sweatpants. The room was dark, save for the single lamp on the nightstand between our beds, which cast a warm, golden glow. I moved to my own bed, my movements stiff and awkward. I felt exposed, clumsy. I slid under the covers, the cheap sheets cool against my skin. The silence in the room was a living thing. It was made of the hum of the ancient air conditioner, the distant rumble of a passing truck on the highway, and the sound of two people breathing in the dark. "You okay, Leo?" Cal asked, his voice quiet. He hadn't moved, was still staring at the ceiling. The question was so simple, so direct, and I had no idea how to answer it. Was I okay? No. I was a tangled mess of anxiety and longing. I was a hair's breadth from either bursting into tears or confessing every secret I'd ever had. But you can't say that to your stoic, competent coworker who probably just wanted to get some sleep. "Yeah," I said, my voice a croak. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a long day, it was that," he agreed. He was silent for another long moment. I watched the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. "You've been quiet the last few weeks." Quieter than usual. He turned his head on the pillow to look at me then. The lamplight carved his face into a landscape of shadow and light. His expression was serious, his gaze intense. It felt like he was seeing right through me, peeling back the layers of deflection and sarcasm I used as armor. I am seen. The thought is both terrifying and exhilarating. Just thinking, I said, which was the truest thing I could say. I was always thinking. Overthinking. It was my primary state of being. About what? He pressed gently. I looked away, focusing on a crack in the plaster wall. What could I tell him? That I spent most of my waking hours cataloging his every move? That his casual kindness felt like a lifeline in the empty ocean of my life? That sharing this small, dingy room with him was both the best and worst thing that had ever happened to me? This job, I lied, seizing on the easiest topic. Wondering if it's the right fit, he considered this, his eyes never leaving my face. You're good at it. Meticulous. You see the details other people miss. The compliment landed like a warm stone in my chest. He noticed. He'd paid enough attention to my work to form an opinion, a positive one. It was more validation than I'd gotten from my own family in years. Thanks, I mumbled, feeling a blush creep up my neck. But you don't like it, he stated. It wasn't a question. I shook my head, a small, barely perceptible movement. It's lonely work. The admission hung in the air between us. It was more than I'd meant to say. It was a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the truth. Lonely. It was the defining word of my life. Kel was silent for so long that I thought he'd dismissed it, or hadn't known how to respond. I was about to make a self-deprecating joke, to paper over the awkward vulnerability, when he spoke again. It doesn't have to be, he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. And then he did something that shattered the fragile composure I had left. He reached out, his hand covering the small distance between our beds, and rested it on my arm, just above the wrist. His fingers were warm, his palms slightly calloused. The touch was gentle, but it felt like a brand, searing through the thin cotton of my sleeve, through my skin, marking me. I stopped breathing. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. His thumb began to move, a slow, rhythmic stroke against the inside of my arm. It wasn't a friendly pat on the shoulder. It wasn't an accidental brush in a doorway. This was deliberate. This was intentional. This was everything. My eyes met his in the dim light. The question was there, hanging unspoken in the charged air. The air conditioner clicked off, plunging the room into an even deeper silence. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. This was the moment. The precipice. I could pull away, laugh it off, pretend it was a misunderstanding. I could retreat back into the safety of my loneliness. Or I could stay. I turned my hand over, my palm facing up, an invitation. A surrender. He threaded his fingers through mine, his grip firm, solid. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth lifted, just a fraction. It was enough. He didn't let go. We lay there for an eternity, our hands clasped in the space between the beds, the single lamp illuminating our joined fingers. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever had, and we hadn't spoken a word. The loneliness I had carried for so long, a heavy cloak on my shoulders, began to feel a little lighter. I don't know when I fell asleep, but when I woke, it was to the gray light of dawn filtering through the cheap blinds. My first thought was of his hand. I looked down. I was alone in my bed, my hand resting on the comforter, empty. A sharp pang of disappointment, so intense it was almost painful, shot through me. It was a dream. Of course it was a dream. A product of exhaustion and wishful thinking. Then I heard it. The soft, even sound of breathing from the other bed. I turned my head slowly. Cal was still there, asleep on his side, facing me. His face was relaxed in sleep, the usual stoic mask gone, revealing someone younger, more vulnerable. One of his arms was dangling off the side of the bed, his fingers nearly touching the floor. He hadn't gone anywhere. The memory of his hand in mine came rushing back, so vivid and real it couldn't have been a dream. The warmth, the calluses, the slow stroke of his thumb. It had happened. I hadn't imagined it. My heart started to beat a frantic, hopeful rhythm. What did it mean? What happens now? The anxiety was back, a cold knot in my stomach. The night had been a bubble, a strange, intimate vacuum created by circumstance. But now it was morning. The sun was rising. Soon, the garage would open, the tire would be fixed, and we would be back in the real world, the world of unspoken rules and carefully maintained distances. Last night would become an anomaly, an embarrassing secret we would both pretend never happened. The thought was unbearable. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could. I needed to move, to do something other than lie there and spiral. I found the small, single-serve coffee maker on the desk, and fumbled with the plastic wrap packets. The machine gurgled and hissed, producing a stream of brownish water that smelled vaguely of burnt plastic. It was disgusting, but it was something to do. I was pouring the sad excuse for coffee into a styrofoam cup when his voice, thick with sleep, made me jump. "Morning," I turned. He was awake, pushing himself up on one elbow, his hair a mess. He looked at me, his eyes still heavy-lidded, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. Not the quick, rare quirk of the lips from last night, but a genuine, unguarded smile. It was like seeing the sun for the first time. "Morning." I managed my voice hoarse. I made coffee." "I think it's coffee," he chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Brave man." He swung his legs out of bed and sat on the edge, stretching his arms over his head. The movement was fluid, powerful. He looked at me again, his smile fading into something more serious. The silence stretched. My anxiety spiked. Here it comes, I thought. The awkward apology. The "let's just forget about last night." He stood up and walked over to me, stopping just a foot away. The room was small, but he made it feel even smaller. He was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. He reached out, not for the coffee cup, but for my face. His hand was gentle as he cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His eyes searched mine, looking for something. "Last night," he said, his voice low and steady. "That wasn't a mistake, Leo." Not for me. Relief washed over me, so potent it made my knees feel weak. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. All the fear, all the overthinking, all the lonely years of silent pining, they all just fell away. In their place was this: the solid warmth of his hand on my skin, the clean scent of him, the quiet certainty in his voice. "Not for me either," I whispered. The words felt huge, momentous. He moved his other hand to my waist, his fingers spreading across the small of my back, pulling me closer until our bodies were just barely touching. The heat between us was electric. I rested my hands on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under my palm. It was just as strong and sure as I had imagined. "Good," he said softly, and then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a fantasy. It was real. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, a question. I answered by pressing back, by tilting my head and deepening the kiss. It was slow, unhurried, a discovery. It tasted of morning and bad coffee and something that felt impossibly like coming home. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. I could feel his breath on my lips. The world outside this room, the car, the job, the long road ahead, it all seemed distant, unimportant. The only thing that mattered was this: him, us. A loud knock on the door made us both jump apart like guilty teenagers. "Towing service," a cheerful voice called from the other side. "Got a call about a Ford sedan with a blown tire?" Reality, it seemed, had arrived. Cal let out a soft groan and ran a hand through his already messy hair. He looked at me, and I saw a flash of the playful humor from the night before in his eyes. "Saved by the bell," he murmured, a wry smile on his face. He squeezed my arm once, a quick, reassuring gesture, before turning to the door. "Be right there," he called out. While he dealt with the tow truck driver, I got dressed, my movements clumsy, my mind still reeling. I felt like a different person than the man who had walked into this room last night. That man was a ghost, an observer. This man had been touched, had been kissed, had been seen. I looked at my reflection in the small, cloudy mirror above the desk. I looked the same, but I felt solid, real. We packed our bags in a comfortable silence. The awkwardness I had dreaded never materialized. Instead, there was a new awareness between us, a quiet hum of energy. Every time our eyes met, a jolt of recognition passed between us. Every accidental brush of our hands as we moved around the small room was no longer a source of anxiety, but a small, secret affirmation. The drive to the garage in the next town was different. We sat in the noisy cab of the tow truck, a large, friendly driver named Gus chatting away about local politics. Kel didn't say much, but he sat close enough that our knees were pressed together. He didn't move his leg away. Neither did I. It was a small, public anchor in a world that was suddenly, dizzyingly new. At the garage, Cal handled everything with his usual competence, arranging for a new tire, paying with the company card, his voice calm and authoritative. I stood back and watched him, but this time, it felt different. I wasn't just observing a capable colleague. I was watching the man who had held my hand in the dark. The man who had kissed me like I was something precious. A fierce, protective wave of affection washed over me, so strong it nearly buckled my knees. An hour later, we were back on the road, our car whole again, the sterile smell of new rubber filling the cabin. The landscape rolled by, the same trees and fields as yesterday, but everything looked different. The colors seemed brighter, the world more vivid. Cal drove, his hands resting easily on the steering wheel. The silence returned, but it wasn't the tense, questioning silence of the past few months. It was a comfortable, settled quiet. I found myself studying his profile, the strong line of his nose, the way his brow furrowed slightly in concentration as he navigated the unfamiliar roads. He felt both intimately familiar and completely new. "So," he said, breaking the silence without taking his eyes off the road. "We need to talk." My stomach did a nervous flip. "Okay," I said, trying to sound casual. "Not now," he clarified. "Not in this car. When we get back. Tonight. My place." It was the same tone he'd used when he told me to stay with him by the car. A statement of fact. A plan already in motion. No room for argument. And I didn't want to argue. It was exactly what I wanted. A real conversation, away from the strange, liminal space of the motel room and the professional confines of the company car. "Okay," I said again, and this time my voice was steady. The rest of the drive passed in a blur of quiet anticipation. We stopped for lunch at a roadside diner. We sat across from each other in a vinyl booth, and when the waitress walked away, he reached across the table and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine on top of the sticky tabletop. It was a bold, simple gesture, and it made my heart soar. He didn't care who saw. He just held my hand. When we finally pulled into the parking lot of our own apartment complex late that afternoon, I felt a strange reluctance to get out of the car. The sedan, which had felt like a cage for so long, had become our sanctuary. It was the place where this new reality had been tested and proven real. Cal shut off the engine, and the sudden silence was absolute. He turned in his seat to face me. His expression was serious, a little guarded. "My apartment. 7 o'clock, he said. "I'll be there, I promised." He nodded, but he didn't move to get out. He just looked at me, his gaze searching, intense. I felt that same feeling from the motel room, of being truly seen. "Leo," he started, then stopped. He seemed to be struggling for words, a rare sight. "I'm new to this." To this, he made a vague gesture between the two of us. "So if I'm clumsy about it, you have to tell me." The vulnerability in his admission was disarming. This was Cal, the man who could fix anything, who was never flustered, admitting to not knowing what to do. It made me feel bold. "I think you're doing just fine," I said, and I leaned across the center console and gave him a quick, soft kiss. When I pulled back, that slow, beautiful smile was on his face again. "Okay," he said, his voice a little breathless. 7 o'clock. The next few hours were a strange mix of torture and giddy excitement. I showered and changed my clothes 3 times. I paced my small, sterile apartment, which suddenly felt more like a waiting room than a home. I tried to read, but the words just swam in front of my eyes. All I could think about was Cal, his hands, his voice, his kiss. At precisely 7 o'clock, I was standing in front of his apartment door, 1 floor below my own. My hand was raised to knock, but I hesitated. What if I had misread everything? What if this was all some huge, elaborate mistake? The old anxieties, my familiar companions, whispered their doubts in my ear. Before I could lose my nerve, the door swung open. Cal stood there, wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were warm. He'd obviously just showered. His hair was damp, and he smelled of soap and fresh laundry. "You're punctual," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm anxious," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. A real smile touched his lips then. He stepped aside. "Come in." Anxious, his apartment was a reflection of him. It was sparse, clean, and functional, but with surprising touches of warmth. There were shelves filled with books on geology and history, a few framed topographical maps on the walls that he had clearly drawn himself, and a large, comfortable-looking leather armchair that was perfectly worn in. It smelled like sandalwood and coffee. It smelled like him. It felt like a home. "Can I get you something?" he asked, already moving toward the small, open kitchen. Beer? Water. Water is fine, I said, my throat suddenly dry. I watched him move around the kitchen, his actions as efficient and graceful as they were when he was changing a tire. He pulled 2 glasses from a cabinet, filled them with water from the fridge, and brought them over to the small dining table. He gestured for me to sit. I sat, my hands clasped nervously in my lap. He sat across from me, the small wooden table the only thing between us. He took a slow drink of water, his eyes never leaving mine. The silence was back, but this time it felt different. It was expectant. He set his glass down with a soft click. I've wanted to do that, he said, his voice quiet but clear in the still apartment. Since the day you walked into the field office 3 months ago, the air left my lungs in a rush. 3 months. He hadn't just been my stoic, competent boss. He had been watching me, just as I had been watching him. The entire narrative I had constructed in my head, the story of my unrequited, secret obsession, was wrong. Or at least, it was only half the story. You have. I stammered, feeling my face flush. He nodded slowly. You were so nervous you knocked over an entire tray of soil samples. You looked up at me, and your face was so red, and you were so apologetic, and all I could think about was how much I wanted to know what you were thinking. He took another sip of water. You're always thinking, Leo. Your mind is never quiet. I can see it in your eyes. I wanted to know what was in there. I was speechless. He had seen me. Not just the clumsy, anxious new guy. He had seen the part of me I thought was invisible to everyone else. I was thinking, I said, my voice barely a whisper, that you had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. The admission hung in the air, fragile and true. A slow smile spread across Cal's face, reaching his eyes, making them crinkle at the corners. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His touch was as warm and steady as it had been in the motel room. So, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. Where do we go from here? It was a real question this time. Not a command, not a plan. An invitation. He was giving me a choice. He was letting me in. I looked at our joined hands on the table, then up at his face. The face I had memorized, the face I had dreamed of. All the fear and uncertainty I had lived with for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet, profound sense of rightness. This was right. I was hoping, I said, my voice gaining strength, that we could just stay right here. For a little while his smile widened. He squeezed my hand. I can do that, he said. We can do that. And in the quiet of his apartment, with the city lights beginning to glitter outside his window, I finally understood. Home wasn't a place you ran to. It was a person you stayed with. And I wasn't running anymore. I was finally home.